Welcome back to the channel. We continue to learn DAX and Power BI, and in this video, we're going to do a guided project of creating dynamic format strings for measures. We're going to create some measures, then we're going to work with the AdventureWorks file. We're going to put a link in the description so you can follow along to the tutorial and a link to the AdventureWorks file. Dynamic format strings allow you to create a DAX variable, and then we can use that formatting based on the currency in this video. So first we'll show you how it works, then we'll show you how to create the dynamic format strings with Power BI. The best way to learn dynamic format strings is to actually follow along with the example. Then you can kind of replicate this and decide how you can use dynamic format strings in your work. Let's go to Power BI. Back in Power BI, dynamic format strings, these can be very helpful when you want to do some dynamic formatting based on a measure result. So this is the project we are going to work with. Remember, there will be a link in the description below. You can follow along, and there's also a file to download so that way you can start with a built-out model. But we're going to show you what dynamic formatting strings can do. In this example, we do have countries, and each of those countries has a different currency. So we're going to load two tables to the model. One is going to be the currency, and then the second one is going to be the currency exchange. So that way, when you select a country like Japan, it automatically formats to the currency of that country. And it formats it for both the table and for the sales amount. So if we choose Canada, it switches to Canadian dollars. If we choose Sweden, it switches to Sweden currency. And then if we go back to Australia, we will see the Australian currency represented in both the converted sales amount and also in the line chart. So it's dynamic format strings. Remember, you can follow along by clicking in the description below. Let's start building out this dynamic format string in Power BI. Continuing along with dynamic format strings in Power BI, in this video, we will be taking a look at dynamic format strings. We showed you what we're going to do. Now let's walk through the tutorial. There will be a link in the description below to the AdventureWorks DW 2020 file. There will also be a link to the Microsoft tutorial. Once you open up the AdventureWorks 2020 file, the first thing we're going to do is create two new tables. So this AdventureWorks file already has a complete built-out model. When you go to the model view, you will see that we have a sales table. That is our fact table. Then we have some lookup tables. It does come with a date table, which we will be using in this tutorial. From the report view, you will see on the right-hand side, you will see all of the current tables that we have in this data model from the AdventureWorks 2020 database. From the home screen, you will want to select Enter Data. And when you enter data in the tutorial, we are going to create two new tables. So the first one is going to be the country currency format strings. And there will be a link in the description. You will copy that. You will go to this create table and paste this country table, and we will name it country currency format strings. And what this is we have the country, then we have the currency, and we have the formatting. So we have Australia, they use a dollar, then the Australian formatting. Denmark uses the krone. They have the krone formatting. For Japan, they have the yen, and then the yen formatting. So that is table number one. Then you are just going to select load because it's all ready to go. We have named that table. We have imported it into and loaded into the data model. On the right-hand side at the top, you'll see the country currency formatting, And this table is already loaded. We'll make this a little bit wider so you can read the entire name of the table. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a second table. And this one's going to be the yearly average exchange rate. So this table, we're going to go back to the home menu. We're going to enter the data. We're going to copy this from the tutorial, and this has all of the yearly exchange rates for each of these countries. Next, we're going to paste it in, and we're going to name this table Yearly Average Exchange Rates. And what this has is the yearly average exchange rates for each of those countries. Next, we're just going to load this table. We've created two tables. We've loaded them into the data model. So in addition to the tables that came downloaded when you downloaded the file, we've added the country currency format strings and then the yearly average exchange rates to the data model. Next, we want to go to the model view, and we want to use the date table to create a new column. So when you select the date column, you have the properties. Next, we are going to create a new column. And the new column is going to be a DAX formula, and it's going to be the year equals the year from the date table. So date and then the date table. This will give us a year column in the date table. So you'll notice that in the date table, we now have the year column. If you go back to the table view, you will see that year column. It'll be the last column on the right-hand side. So now we can go back to the model view and we can create our relationships. So if you noticed, when we created these two new tables, they did not form automatic relationships. So now we need to do that. So if we select the country currency format string, we want to select the country column and we want to bring it over to the yearly average exchange rate. And it starts out as a many to one, and that is correct. And the tables are from the country currency exchange rate. We want to have this active, and we want to have it a single direction. So the average exchange rate should be the many side of this relationship. So that is the current relationship. Next, we want to bring over the second relationship. So from the yearly average exchange rate, we want to select the year, and we want to bring this over to the date table, and we want to connect it to the year. So we have the year in the date table. We have the year that we created in the yearly average exchange rate. We want to create a relationship by selecting year in the year average exchange rate, bring it over to the year in the date table. And what this is going to do is we need to select, we have the year selected, but we want to have a many to many. We want to make this relationship active, but we only want the cross-filter direction to be single, and then the yearly average exchange rate on the filters on the date. Then we just need to select OK. So that is the new relationship between the yearly average exchange rate, and it's a many-to-many with that date table. So now we've added the two additional relationships to this table. We've created our relationships with the country currency format and the yearly average exchange rate. Next, we are going to create a new page On this new page, we are going to rename it Currency Dynamic. Next, we need to create a measure table. And if you've never created a measure table, I did do a video on how to create a measure table and the advantages. But quickly, we will just quick enter data from the home screen. And we're going to name this underscore measures. And the reason why we do it underscore measures is that way it'll go to the top of the other tables. We aren't going to load anything else. And you'll see this new measure table at the top. And currently it just has that column 1. What we're going to do now is create a new measure from this underscore measure table. And the new measure is going to be a sales amount, and it's going to be the sum of the sales and the sales amount from the sales table. If you're following along in the tutorial, there will be a way to copy that into this measure. All you need to do now is hit enter, and you see the sales amount measure comes into that measure score table. So now we can just select column 1 and we can go hide on that column 1, and now we just have our measure showing. So that is how you make a measure table. So we have now added a sales amount. Next, we're going to create a measure that computes the exchange rate. This is calculated with an if statement, an is blank, and an average. Now in the tutorial, there is a way to copy this link, and I will put a link to the description of the tutorial and also to the file. From the measure table, you're going to select new measure. You're going to copy and paste this measure in there. It's going to be called exchange rate yearly average. And it starts off with an if, then if it's is blank, selected value, the country currency format string country, then selected value United States, and then the average. So we'll show you how this works, but that is the exchange rate yearly average measure. Just hit enter, and now you have that measure in your measure table. The next measure we're going to create is a converted sales amount measure. So again, in the measure table, you create a new measure. You're going to copy from the tutorial link and paste, but it's going to be the converted sales amount equals the sum x of the date column using a calculate function. And then it's going to take the sales amount times the exchange rate from that yearly average. So that's what's going to be selected. So whatever's selected in that yearly average, it's going to take the sales amount times the exchange rate. So we'll show you how this works. You just need to hit enter. Now you've created those measures. So now we are in the report view. We have our measures table. We have a converted sales amount, the exchange rate, yearly average, and the sales amount. Next, we are going to create our first visual. We're going to select a blank area. We are going to add a line chart. And from this line chart, we're going to bring in the converted sales amount. So that doesn't show anything yet, but when you bring in the year from the date table, now we see 2017 through 2020. We're going to make this a little bit wider. And that is our first measure on our report. Now we are going to copy this, Command C. Then we're going to click a blank area in the report view, hit Control V. Next, we're going to turn this into a table from the visual. Now we have a table of that same line chart we created. Make this a little bit smaller. We'll bring this up. And the only thing we're going to do now is sort this by year. So if we click under year, that'll have it go in order: 2017, 18, 19, 20. Next, we are going to use a slicer, and a slicer allows you to filter out. If you've never used a slicer before, it allows you to filter out data. So we're going to click on a blank area of the report, click on the slicer icon in the visual gallery. To give us more room, we're going to close this filters pane, and we're also going to close this build pane. So now we have more room on the working page. We're going to make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. We'll zoom this in. And then for the slicer, we want to bring in the country from the country currency format strings. These are the table that we created. So now if we select the slicer, we're going to select the country. So next, we're just going to start to clean this up a little bit. We're going to work on the slicer, and if you go to the build settings, we're going to make a few changes for the size and style. For the padding, we're going to add 10-point padding all the way around. Next, we're going to make this, we're going to turn off the title, leave that off. For the slicer settings, we want a tile. We're going to make this go down, bring this all the way down. And we're going to make just a couple of other, for the slicer header, we're going to turn that off. So now, because they obviously know that this is a country. Then we're going to make just a couple of more slicer setting changes. For the values, we're going to make this a little bit different color. If you select more colors, we're going to make this pound and then 6 threes, which is kind of a gray. And then if you hit enter, and then for the padding, we're going to use a 2-point padding. And now we have that set up. And the only other thing we're going to do on the slicer settings is we are going to make this under the properties. We've got our advanced options, and then under the visual, we can start to make this. We don't need a visual border, but for the selection, we want to make this a single select. So we want to turn this on. So Australia defaults to the top. And if you notice, we have still the dollars, and it's still dollars. But now we're going to show you how to connect this to be for the currency format. The visuals are ready. Now it's time to create a dynamic format string. If you notice, when we select Australia, we still keep the dollar symbols for the United States, and we still see the dollar symbol in the line chart. Next, this is how you create the dynamic format string. We are going to select the converted sales amount measure. What we are going to do now is in your format, you have options. You can change it to currency, decimal number, percentage. At the bottom, we have dynamic. That is the selection we want to make for creating a dynamic format string. When we select dynamic, next, we just need to substitute this measure. So in the tutorial, there is going to be a measure to copy. And when you paste this in there, it's going to be selected value. And that means whenever you select a value from the countries, it's going to change it to that format. And all we need to do now is hit enter. And if you notice, we have the Australian dollar symbol in the table. We have the Australian dollar symbol in the line chart. If we select Canada, it switches to the Canadian dollar. If we select Denmark, we go back to the Denmark krone. And if we select Japan, we get the yen, and that is the dynamic string. And that is how you create a dynamic string query in Power BI using DAX. There will be a link to the tutorial in the description below. There also will be a link to the AdventureWorks file below so that you can either download it or download it directly from Microsoft. That is a look at how you can convert dynamic strings inside a measure, and you can look at your Eurozone, you can look at your Sweden currency, and then if you select United States, it just goes back to blank because that is the original dollar amount. So if you select Japan, that is the Japan. If you select Australia, that is the Australian currency. Remember to share, like, and subscribe. We've got more tutorials on learning DAX in Power BI.